Good morning and a very warm welcome to KTN News Morning Express. My name is Brenda Zedaradido, sitting in for my colleague Michael Gitonga. Always a pleasure having you tuned in to KTN News Morning Express, where we look at what is making the headlines, not only here in the country, but also beyond. A lot is making the headlines in the country. Matters COVID-19 in terms of affecting schools and teachers, matters COVID-19 infections among health workers. And of course, we shall also be crossing over to our neighboring countries, Uganda, Rwanda, Tanzania, and also to the US, just to know what is also making the headlines there. So kindly stay tuned for the next 2 hours as we delve deeper into this. And this morning, I'm privileged to have my guest, that is Nambale, Member of Parliament, that is Sakwa Bunyasi, who will also help me in terms of just trying to understand what is being talked about in different newspapers. There you can see him already ready for this discussion, and later on we shall just be joining him. He will be joining us later on. But first, I'd like us to have a look at what is making the headlines, not only here in the country. But let me first start with the newspaper, our neighboring country, that is Uganda. We need to know what is making the headlines there in Uganda. Of course, Ugandans are almost going back to the polls. We've seen opposition leaders trying to fight for a position in terms of getting the nomination certificates, and some of them have been arrested in that process. So let's have a look at what Uganda is saying when it comes to politics. Now, we're having a look at the Daily Monitor, and this is what Busoga residents are telling Bobi Wine, the politician, who's also a musician, telling him that he needs to save them from poverty. That is a request to Bobi Wine. And of course, they talked to him when he was addressing a rally in Uganda district, where he talked about the same issues. He was set to hold a rally in Bigiri district. That was as of yesterday. And of course, the other thing that it's going to be a heated debate, actually, and a heated political campaigns when it comes to who will be the next president of Uganda. We also have General Muntu criticizing Brigade Sunday over remarks, a lot of remarks that have been made there. And General Muntu said if he's elected president, because he also wants to be the president of Uganda, he will professionalize both the army and police and ensure they cooperate well with civilians. And you've seen, of course, questions being asked about how Ugandan police officers in the army, interact with civilians anytime they protest. Now, that is what is happening in Uganda through the Daily Monitor. So far now, at least we know what is happening there. Now, to a neighboring country that just held its presidential election just recently, and of course, John Pombe Magufuli is ruling for the next 5 years, and immediately he was sworn in. This is what he has to say. Actually, he's hinting on a possible successor even before staying in office for a second term in terms of a month. And so he's saying that he has a bit of an hint of who he wants to succeed in. Remember, Tanzanian politics has been a heated debate with a lot of questions being asked on the credibility of the just concluded presidential election. And of course, yesterday, being Amande Magufuli poured cold water on some CCM cadres said to be seeking to succeed him in 2025, saying the party central committee CC will not endorse a candidate older than him. So he wants a candidate who will succeed him to be a bit younger, than Magufuli himself. Now, let's go to Rwanda, the New Times newspaper, and it's about matters COVID-19 mass testing exercise being taken to schools. Schools have reopened in Uganda, in Rwanda, sorry, just the same way schools have been opened here in the country, in Tanzania, and also in Uganda. And something that the Rwandan government has put into consideration is mass testing. And we have it where the Minister of Education, that's the Rwandan Minister of Education, has said that at least 3,000 COVID-19 samples were taken and were actually taken from schools as the government beefs up its effort to assess the prevalence rate of the virus in schools. And that is what is happening in Uganda now. So you know what is happening within the East African community. Let's cross to miles and miles away now to the US. And it's another thing that can I say outgoing president? Not really, because Trump is still trying to defend, his claims that the votes were rigged. So let me just say, yeah, he's still the incumbent president, and we have also President-elect Joe Biden. But now our focus is what CNN is saying about Trump. President of the U.S., Donald Trump, has fired Homeland Security official. This is not the first time we're seeing Trump fire officials, especially when it comes to the security sector. Just last week, he fired another security official, which led to some other security officials actually stepping down. And Chris Krobs, the director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, had previously rejected the president's election conspiracy theory. So Trump looking at it, is like he's thinking people were not, supporting his idea that the election was not free and fair, actually being shown the door. Something that Democrats have also questioned, the decision as to why the president is actually firing people. So now, you're up to date with what is making the headlines in the U.S., especially matters elections. And this morning, before we delve into what is making the headlines in the country, we've had a look at the countries in East African community and also the U.S. But then this morning, our focus is on COVID-19. And of course, we ask you an tweetable question. With a surge in COVID infections in schools, do you think learners will be safe when schools fully reopen in January? So January 4th, all students are expected to report in school. Students and pupils report to school. But then the question is, with a surge in COVID infections in schools, do you think learners will be safe when schools fully reopen in January? This is a concern to education stakeholders, teachers, and also union officials. Let's begin having this conversation on our Twitter poll this morning. KTN News KE, #Morning Express, or at Zeta Brenda. I'll be getting your feedback this morning. But now, let me bring in Sakwa Bunyasi, Member of Parliament for Nambale, who's joining us now virtually. And thank you so much, Mheshimiwa, for talking to us here on KTN News Center. So I'd like us to, the Swahili people would say, kuchambua gazeti, what is kuchambua gazeti vilivyo, so that we know what is really making the headlines. And I'll begin with the Standard newspaper, one of our products here at the Standard Group. And at the top, it is about BBI. And it is that Uhuru Raila take BBI numbers to war. Raila yesterday said that, actually on Thursday, tomorrow, he will be launching, him and President Uhuru Kenyatta will be launching the collection of signatures. This is despite a lot of opposition. In Handshake Leaders, the start referendum protocol with launch of signature collections tomorrow, which is Thursday. And allies say they're targeting 5 million Kenyans to endorse their bid in a fresh wave of supremacy battle with Deputy President William Ruto. Honorable Bunyasi.
Brenda, thanks a lot. It is interesting because this is going to be a referendum in which I don't see anybody willing to be the person opposing the referendum push, not because they agree with the possible intentions or possible outcomes of the referendum, but I think people are thinking of it as a waste of resources. It costs a lot to mount an anti-referendum move. It costs a lot to mount the referendum itself.
All right.
But the state seems to be committed. Because we're going into elections and we are in a very bad state and COVID hasn't helped.
All right.
I think the interesting thing this time is that it looks like there is a leadership clique versus the people. That's essentially how I see it, that the leadership clique is convinced that this is the way to go, that people agree with the intention of BBI, but that they're going to go to the referendum to change the governance structure essentially. So it's going to be interesting this time. It will be the leadership versus the people. It's not as if within the movement there's anybody who is going to mount any useful opposition to the process that they are initiating. But of course there are two steps. One is to win the referendum. The other will be to win the election thereafter.
All right.
Because the people are still going to decide.
All right, and let's have a look at something else that's making the headlines. The front page, the big story of the day for the Standard newspaper is about the wailing governor, Nairobi Governor Mike Mbuvi Sonko. And he's at crossroads with NMS, and, when he got into office, he had a big plan for Nairobi, but Nairobians feel like you're not really doing what you had expected. So comes in NMS.
Yes, and I think in many ways the NMS is probably a good introduction, except that we needed a bit more clarity looking forward. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Just for a moment. Oh, good. We need a bit more clarity looking a bit more forward. Introduction of NMS is good to get things going, but it shouldn't be an imposition on a democratically elected city government. However, there are provisions in the law which were exploited, which were used, to which Sonko appended his signature, allowing the executive to be able to intervene and provide what they felt were services that were missing. And certainly, I think my personal view is that Honorable Governor for Nairobi also spent a bit of too much time in what I call it, in showmanship rather than on, rolling sleeves up and getting things done. And the military guys just going in to do that. I think we may be headed into a model like that of the United States, where we are copying a lot from. In Washington, D.C., it's, although other states are headed by governors, it's headed by a mayor. So there is a mayor's council, which has quite a bit of power as a mayor's council, but they can't get their legislation implemented without the consent of Congress, of the House of Representatives. So it may be a model we are going into that, yes, you may have representation in the city, but that the actions will have to be vetted by the executive for that to go forward. So democracy is not entirely taken away. If NMS replaces the city county assembly, for example, that would be a serious violation of the rights of the people of Nairobi. But I think that we need people who are really focused in managing Nairobi. It's very complex. Upgrading the transport systems, management of our waste management, our dealing with issues of around security, just making these the sort of the envy, not of the whole nation, the envy of the world, requires quite a bit of commitment and leaderships that are really, really people-oriented. So I think Governor Sonko may have missed an opportunity in how he spread his focus.
All right. So for that story about BBI, grab your Standard newspaper, a copy of Standard newspaper, page 6, matters about the wailing governor, Nairobi Governor Mike Mbuvi Sonko, page 4 of the Standard newspaper. And Mheshimiwa, before we move to the Nation newspaper, I'd like us now to have a look at Standard newspaper, page 2, in terms of Kenya tops tech's role in Africa. Like, we're leading when it comes to matters technology, and that has also been witnessed during this time of COVID-19. Lots of university students inventing so many equipment that can be used in hospitals during this time of COVID-19.
I think this is really a good story, very heartening story. Kenya has invested a lot in education, and sometimes we are too tough on ourselves. People are focusing on rapid reforms in education without looking at what the gains have been. And one of the gains has been that we are truly producing talent. We have produced students that have gone overseas and excelled. And clearly we have talent and innovative capacity internally. That's not now our area of problem. I think our area of problem is how do you nurture it? How do you carry it? Innovators are not the entrepreneurs in many places. People who invented the light bulb or telephone communication did not turn out to be themselves the biggest entrepreneurs to use that technology. So we need to develop institutions within Kenya that will be able to nurture what our young people are finding and are innovating about before other people grab it. That's, I think, where we are lacking. But we have no shortage of people who are able to come into the picture. So I really think that the engagement at critical moments of our lives, of our nation, like now with the ravages of COVID and the economy that's gone down quite so much, we should now think about innovation and niche markets, and how we can push the envelope at the frontiers. And to do that, we must put resources in these areas that will nurture these talents. And the president demonstrated when he was in Manyani. So what he did not say is how we got to carry forward this to a commercial level. We can lead in the world. We have the capacity to lead as well. We just our colonial mentality doesn't leave us all the time. We always think that what will the others, what are they doing? These innovations indicate that we can be at the forefront. We can be at the frontier of what we are looking at.
All right. And so there is a story that, that story, of course, it's on page 2. And I want us to move to the Nation newspaper. And when we're moving to the Nation newspaper, it is the same story that I wanted us to tackle on the Standard newspaper, page 7, about teachers being asked to work from home over COVID-19. And TSU is talking about teachers who are 50 years and above to work from home. So let's just combine that story of that's on the Standard newspaper, page 7, with what is making the headlines on the Nation newspaper at the front page. It's about, let's first begin actually, I think I'm misleading you, Mheshimiwa. The one for teachers about COVID-19 should be on the Nation newspaper. We shall be diving straight into it later on. I remember the page on the Nation newspaper. But now, let's have a look at the front page of the Nation newspaper. Just go to the front page of the Nation newspaper. And a major concern for parents and school heads and education stakeholders is about school fees. And they're saying that now they want the government to increase the allocation of fees for free primary education and free secondary school education, and also time to be given for clearing school balances. because of the effects of COVID-19 on parents?
I think that we are in unusual times, and although we had settled into a formula for cost sharing in education, I think the slowdown in the economy all around because of COVID-19, but also because of other structural problems we had before COVID. And I won't go into those, just to keep the discussion on what is current. We have had some of the problems have been in several years, and then COVID has made it worse. But be it as it may, we are now at a point in which government has to say, we as a nation, how do we carry ourselves forward? How do we help the people who have been ravaged by COVID? And remember, it's not just those who are working, even those in informal employment, even those in the informal sector, all of them have been ravaged. How do we help out? What kind of rescue package do we, for example, have for the following 2 years or so to tide the parents through this? The government, the Kenyan government had very good policy to say, no, but no child shall be left behind. We want 100% transition. We want 100% eligible enrollment. We don't want those very, very noble goals to completely suffer, because that, if we do that, we are shooting ourselves in the foot, because tomorrow's success depends on today's efforts by our children's schools. That's where the techies will come from and so on.
All right.
So
and
I agree that, yes, it's going to be a lot of pressure on the parents.
All right. And, I like the way you've reviewed, there you've actually given us an in-depth explanation on that Nation newspaper as a front page story. Because even when you look at the Nation newspaper, page 7, if you can just turn with me to page 7, and the private schools are raising concern because it's saying that over 200 private institutions have been closed. This is because they do not have funds to run the schools, unlike public schools.
I think that it's good.
All right. We have been...
Okay. When you go through then you're going...
I can hear you. Kindly continue.
Are we together, Brenda? I'm saying that, when we go through a crisis like this, we expect to get losers and winners in it. Some of the, all institutions have incurred losses. The difference between public and private is that the public ones have a grandfather, who is the national government, who can rescue them, for whom it's their responsibility to rescue and maintain. The private institutions rely on resources that are internal to their institutional structure, and that they may not have endless capacity to revive them. We are going to get a significant reduction in the input in our national education system from private institutions. They play an important role. But government's responsibility then is to pull up their socks a bit. For example, in respect to quality of education, easing the infrastructure constraints, easing now with the corona guidelines, ensuring that there is that added capacity, both in human resources staff, but also in physical facilities. I would even favor, for example, tents that will last through COVID, which can allow the broadening of the class. Teachers are not there, there are not that many, at least not in the part of the world where I come from, in Busia or in Ambare, my constituency, and many parts I think have the same problem. But at least you can probably spread them out in areas where climate will allow as a temporary measure. I know putting up buildings is going to take time. But so taking this slack that the private institutions have left, it's not going to be easy. But that's, I think, going to be the reality. And I think private institutions have played a useful role as well.
All right. And there are fears by the private sector, private schools, that it will be chaotic as schools reopen, because schools are supposed to be open on the 4th of January, but several of the private schools have been closed. But away from that, so I'd like us now to go back to what I was telling you about, because I'd like us to finish with this whole discussion about old review, newspaper review about the education sector. And when you look at page 6, of the Nation newspaper, there is a concern. The headline is, there is a concern as teachers are likely to be at high risk of contracting COVID-19 while at work. And I'd like us now to tie that with what I was telling you, what has been published on the Standard newspaper, page 7, about teachers who are over 50 years being asked by TSC to actually work from home, the safety of teachers. This is what both stories is focusing on, are focusing on rather.
I think teachers have become frontline persons in the fight against COVID, in the sense that schools open. They are the ones who are going to be interacting with a large number of children who have come from different families, and even though the children themselves may not show symptoms, but they may come from families where there are issues. So teachers are really exposed. Now, what I do not understand, I've been thinking hard about that issue, that teachers can work from home. I do not know what that means whatsoever. I actually still do not.
TSC was talking about teachers doing it virtually, technologically.
Now, I don't know which part of Kenya they're talking about in this respect, except in a very, very limited circumstance. There are no visual aids in many of these schools, the truth be told. There may be a few schools, perhaps in cities, particularly in the public sector, that can provide that kind of linkage. Teachers won't run radio programs from home and give a virtual class. I think that's a kind of broad brush that has little applicability in specific situations, which are the dominant situations in the country. I think it's fair to say, yes, take a day off, stay home. Maybe they'll be doing the marking and helping others in some way or another, but it won't be contemporaneous. It won't be something that is being done while you're in class and teaching at home and you're interacting.
All right.
It might be sequential. There are many ways in which teachers can help in the evening, so do something. I do not know exactly how that's going to work out, but I know it's a challenge. It's a real challenge. And also, lastly, it's not just age that seems to matter in this respect. I think what has been proven is that the underlying conditions seem to be even more important. This will happen. We have children, I'm told, who are as young as 5, less than 10, and have diabetes. They'll be at risk. We have young children who are in their teens, upper teens, who have hypertension. They'll be at risk. I think we should be more incisive in how we look at it, rather than simply the age bracket that we are looking at.
All right, and finally, the final newspaper review. Of course, you've talked about, we won't talk about the people who are supposed to be collecting the signatures, because you've talked to us about that signature collection. I'd like us to have a look, to have the last review of Business Daily. And what has caught my attention on this is the COVID audit funds, public investment committee that is chaired by Abdulswamad Nasir, actually investigating, questioning the PS for Health yesterday on how COVID funds have been used. The PS saying yes, telling the committee yesterday that, KEMSA overpriced some of the, equipment when it comes to PPEs. And you'll also tie it with KCB, that is the bank, is set to issue profit warning on COVID woes.
Okay. First of all, in respect of the inquiry by the Public Investments Committee, which looks at parastatals, parastate institutions, in this case KEMSA, is going to go through over the same kind of ground that was the headlines recently, but it will probably be a bit more incisive in terms of how KEMSA as an institution has actually handled these funds. And I do hope that they'll provide additionality over what we already have seen in the papers. I know they are capable of doing that. I don't know the depth of the inquiry. I have not sat in, and let us wait for that to be concluded. But one thing that we should say is that it looks like the COVID theft is off the headlines. It's now going to be within the technical corridors, institutional corridors corridors of institutions. For example, it may be within parliamentary institutions, it may be in the court corridors, it may be in EACC, DPP. We may never hear of it. That's the worry. That's Kenya. And we shall soon sanitize it and just move on. But I think that without getting to the bottom of that, we can't get towards where Rwanda is, for example, in terms of what they have done and the use of resources. I think that level of impunity that we have seen is going to be played out. But let us see how this committee, what light it throws on it, and what other prosecuting and other judicial institutions can do, picking up from there. And I think we must get a way in which there is some sort of feedback to the nation as for how these things are going. You just can't say, oh, we are doing it, we don't have to tell you. Then what if you're doing nothing? That's the problem that we've got. So I think one of the saddest story of this year has been theft of COVID funds at a time when it's truly, we didn't think it was that bad, although when we went through the first phase. But you can see the depth and intensity that now we have. And now to have that on your headline, that intensity, and we talk about the theft of COVID funds side by side, I think it becomes the most significant issue of the nation today. And it's an existential threat, actually, seriously, because it's taking away the best of our people, it's hobbling the economy, so you can't fund the rest of the things. And friends out there want to be able to carry Kenya's needs fully. No.
All right. And the last one now about KCB, which is set. Actually, KCB is supposed to issue a profit warning on COVID COVID woes, because the bank argues that the top lenders' profits will drop by at least 25%.
That is an interesting one. I know from a corporate perspective, anytime, because many of these all of them are owned by shareholders who have expectations of what return they'll get on their capital, their investment. And it is part of the practice that when you anticipate that profits will fall by more than 25%, you must say so, particularly for companies that are listed on the Securities Exchange. So it's a requirement. And 25% is a big dip. A very big dip of the shareholders, but it's not a threat to the existence of the institution.
All right.
As you know, the few institutions that have really made profits, and they're exploiting opportunities legally exploiting opportunities in their sectors, have been banks. So clearly, it may drop 25%, but nobody should worry that the bank is under threat of anything.
Right.
No real big risk if you are a saver, if you hold your savings with them. Is 25% of fairly large margins that they have.
All right.
But for shareholders, of course, it may be a pointer that my institution is heading down, and they're watching to see if it depends too much before they can move. I do not think we're at risk of that. But it indicates that there's pressure all around, except that some people, like banks, some institutions like banks, but individuals who are millionaires and billionaires will weather this for a while.
All right.
It's the ordinary person, it's the small companies, the startups and so on, that are not going to declare a profit margin, are just going to close down and may not reopen. So I think attention as a country needs to be on who are these that are the biggest losers, and what do we do to be able to support them, because they're extremely important. Kenya's employment, over 80% comes from small and micro enterprises, including Juakalis.
All right.
And so that's where the headache is going to be. That's what's going to hobble the nation.
All right. At that point, I'd like to say Asante Sana. Thank you so much, Member of Parliament, Nambale constituency, Sakwa Bunyasi, reviewing this, helping me in terms of newspaper review this morning on KTN News Morning Express. Asante Sana, and have a nice day. And this morning, on our big question, we're asking you about the surging COVID infections in schools and whether you think learners will be safe when schools fully reopen in January. I can see your feedback are still streaming in. I'll be sampling them during KTN News Morning Express and also at the end tail of KTN News Morning Express. Talk to us at KTN News KE at Zeta Brenda, beginning with the hashtag KTN News Morning Express. And you're telling us whether you think the surge in COVID infections in schools, learners will be safe actually when they reopen schools in January. Now, a short commercial break, but when we come back, now we shall be shifting our focus to a big question in terms of our discussion, COVID-19 in schools.